Chapter 897. At the beginning of the play there was a cliffhanger. Do Tianzhang, a xianxia in Chuzhou City, owed Granny Kai 40 taels of silver, so he had to sell his 7-year-old daughter Do Yi to Granny Kai as a child bride. Do Tianzhang received 10 taels of silver from Granny Kai for traveling expenses, and then went to the capital city to take the exam. There were not many highlights in this cliffhanger, but the actors on the stage were excellent, and the plot was smooth. It was quite enjoyable to watch, so the audience was not disappointed. That little Xuanhuan is quite good at acting at such a young age. You don't know. They have been trained in this field since they were young. Since they can go on the stage, you can't find any fault with them. That's true. But since this play is called Do Yi's Injustice, I don't know what the injustice is. What's the hurry? It's just the beginning. Let's keep watching. Because of the popularity of the Justice Bao series, people were very fond of this kind of drama. Who wouldn't like to redress the grievances of the people? Soon they found out why Do Yi had been wronged. The Kai family moved, Do Yi's husband died early and she and her mother-in-law depended on each other. Then they were framed by evil people and happened to meet a corrupt official. Do Yi had no choice but to confess and admit the crime in order to save her mother-in-law from being tortured. She was sentenced to death and sent to the execution ground. According to the usual practice of the play, this was the most exciting part of the play. This corrupt official deserves to die. This daughter-in-law is so filial. She is willing to bear the injustice in order to save her mother-in-law. Where is Lord Bao? Why isn't he here? Quickly reverse the verdict for Do Yi. Have you ever seen a play before? How could Lord Bao show up at this time? It was Guard Zhan who descended from the sky and shouted, "Spare her life." Finally, someone couldn't help but remind them. Brothers, are you two acting? Really? Isn't that Justice Bao? Back to the stage. Do Yi had been sent to the execution ground. Two voices rang in the audience's ears, like a huge bell. Breaking the law for no reason, not being on guard against being punished by the Constitution, the cry was earth-shattering. In an instant, wandering souls went to the Sanluo temple. How could they not blame the heaven and earth? Good people suffer poverty and have a shorter life, while evil people enjoy wealth and have a longer life. Heaven and earth. He acted as if he was afraid of the strong and bullied the weak, but it turned out that this was also how he pushed the boat with the current. You're the earth, yet you can't tell good from bad. Heaven, you are wrong to judge the virtuous and foolish to be heaven. As soon as these two sentences were spoken, everyone's hearts immediately sank. They seemed to feel that the injustice Do Yi had suffered had reached the point where even heaven and earth resented her. At this time the executioner said, "Death is at hand, what else do you have to say?" Do Yi said, "I want a clean banquet. When I Do Yi stand up I want Zhang 2 white ropes to hang on the spear. If I Do Yi am really wronged my head will fall wherever the knife passes. My hot blood will not stain the ground, it will all fly to the white silk." Now is the hottest time of the year. If Do Yi is really wronged after she dies, 3 feet of auspicious snow will fall from the sky and cover her corpse. I Do Yi died a wrong death. From now on Chuzhou City will suffer from drought for 3 years. Do Yi's voice was sorrowful as she made 3 wishes in a row. Blood stains the white silk, blood splatters in June, 3 years of drought. The crowd was silent and no one was talking anymore. The executioner shouted angrily, "The time has come, execute her." In the middle of the stage the executioner swung the knife down, and Do Yi fell to the ground. Her blood sprayed into the air and splashed on the white silk. At this moment, more than half of the people in the audience couldn't help but stand up. Blood stains on the white silk? It was indeed blood stains on the white silk. Do Yi's first wish had come true. On the stage, the executioner quietly made a hand gesture, and a board rose up from where a piece of the stage was missing, and the stage became seamless again. Right at this moment, someone below suddenly shivered and murmured, "Why do I feel that the surroundings are chilly?" Someone couldn't help but wrap his arms around himself. Although the weather was hot, there were ice mirrors everywhere. Even if it wasn't hot, it wouldn't be cold. Someone suddenly felt a chill in his nose and he couldn't help but touch his nose, only to find that it was wet. When he raised his head, he discovered that there were actually white snowflakes falling from the sky. Is it snowing? How is that possible? It's summer now and we are in a brothel. Above everyone's heads on the thick beam, someone was standing there, gently shaking the bamboo basket in his hand, and extremely fine ice shards were scattered down from above. When everyone looked back to the stage, Do Yi's body had already been buried under the snow. As the tragic music became clearer, the lines of the opera surfaced in everyone's mind. I don't want half a star of blood spilled in the mortal world, it's all in the air. If I have a heart full of resentment, I will feel the 6 ice flowers roll like a brocade, so that my body won't be revealed. Dou died an unjust death. From now on, Chuzhou City will suffer a drought for 3 years. This time there was no bodyguard Zhan, no justice Bao, and Dou was executed. The vows she made before her death were fulfilled one by one. Blood splashed on the white silk and snow fell in June. According to common sense, this was impossible. Even heaven and earth were touched by her grievances, and her wish was fulfilled. 3 years later, Dou's father, Dou Tianzhong, would reverse the verdict for her and clear her name. However, at this moment the atmosphere in the brothel was getting out of control. On the stage, the performers who were about to start their performance had no choice but to stop. Below the stage, many people stared at the stage in a daze, and many had tears streaming down their cheeks. Dou was unfortunate and she was miserable. However, only a few of those who could sit and watch the show were from rich families. Their status was not much higher than Dou's, and they were also bullied by all kinds of evil forces. This was Dou's injustice, and it was also their injustice. The show could no longer go on, so the manager of the brothel announced that the last twist of Dou's injustice would be postponed. When the audience walked out of the brothel, they felt that the scorching sun was not as hot as it used to be. Instead, they felt a chill down their spines. They were sweating, but it was cold sweat. What's wrong with you guys? Is the show over? Was it good? What's going on? Say something. The audience couldn't get any useful information from the people who had already walked out of the brothel. By then, the second show was about to begin, so they didn't have time to ask the audience questions. After a long time, the second group of people walked out of the brothel. An unjust case shocked the world and snow fell in June. In just a few days, the play known as The Greatest Injustice of All Time had spread across the capital. All the other shows in the dozens of brothels in the capital had temporarily stopped, and only Dou's injustice was being rehearsed in every brothel. In the county government of the capital, County Magistrate Lu looked at the thick stack of papers in front of him and suddenly felt dizzy. He slumped in his chair and murmured, "How can there be so many unjust cases in the capital, right under the feet of the emperor?" Below, Arrestor Zhao showed a wry smile and said, "Lord Lu, don't complain. These days it's the same everywhere in the county government. Chuzhou is our neighbor. The governor of Chuzhou and the magistrate of Xianxia County have been scolded badly. The people of the capital are filled with righteous indignation. Some people are even kneeling at the gate of the palace, begging the princess to investigate the case thoroughly and prove Dou's innocence. This is just a play." County Magistrate Lu slammed the table angrily and said loudly, "But there are so many unjust cases, how can I investigate? Sir, this is really nothing. Think about it this way. In the play, if it wasn't the magistrate of Xianxia County, but the magistrate of the capital..." "Shut up." County Magistrate Lu's face turned pale, and his whole body quivered. He suddenly bounced up from the chair and shouted, "Beat the drum, raise the court, I'm going to break 10 today." On the street in the capital, a man looked at the woman next to him and said pitifully, "My wife, believe me, I really lost my purse. I didn't keep a vixen outside." The woman said angrily with a face full of disbelief, "How dare you deny it? You have the smell of her perfume on you, do you think I can't smell it?" The man helplessly took out a bottle of perfume from his pocket and said, "This is the birthday gift I bought for you with the money I saved for a year," he said with a sad face. "How dare you suspect me of keeping a vixen outside? I am more innocent than Dou." "What? You have a secret stash of money?" At the corner of the street, a woman chased after an 8 or 9-year-old child and said angrily, "You didn't go to school today, did you go to the brothel?" The child stopped and shook his head. "I didn't." "You are wrongly accusing me." The woman grabbed his arm. "How dare you lie to me? The teacher in school told me everything." "I really didn't." The child shook his head violently and said loudly, "Mother, you are wrongly accusing me. If I die of being wrongly accused, I will make my blood splash on the brothel, snow in June, and drought for 3 years in the capital." "You are still denying it." The woman took off his pants on the street and slapped him a few times, saying as she slapped him, "I will make your blood splash on the brothel, snow in June, and drought for 3 years. Recently, there was a wind of crying injustice in the capital. Everyone, regardless of gender or age, called themselves Dou. When the brothel performed for free, there were even no pedestrians on the usually crowded streets. In addition, the government offices in each county were blocked by the people who appealed every day. The situation did not improve until the government suppressed several groups of troublemakers with a tough attitude. At this time, in front of the government office of the Ministry of Justice, a weak woman walked out of the crowd. After beating the big drum at the entrance of the government office, she knelt in front of the door and cried out in a sad voice, "Sir, I am wrongly accused." Chapter 898. Sir, I've been wronged. The woman knelt in front of the Ministry of Justice. Her voice was extremely sorrowful, as if she had a great grievance in her heart that she had nowhere to cry about. It drew the sidelong glances of passers-by. Recently, the common people had been filing complaints. It wasn't just the yamen of the various counties, but also the yamen of the capital, the imperial censorate, the Ministry of Justice, and even the Ministry of Revenue, Ministry of Rights, and Ministry of Works. As long as it was a yamen, it was unavoidable. After all, the number of yamens was limited and there were many people. It was impossible for them all to gather together. Even if all the yamens in Jingdo were taken into account, there wouldn't be enough. This kind of situation had greatly hindered the normal operation of the yamen. Thus, the eldest princess quickly made an order based on the feelings of the people and the actual situation in Jingdo. Anyone who took the opportunity to purposely cause trouble and block the yamen would be severely punished as a warning to others. If there were truly any grievances, they should be filed in an orderly manner. The relevant yamen would deal with them one by one according to the urgency and severity of the case. Any grievances had to be tried and any cases had to be reversed. The bottom line of the law was strictly observed, and the people were given a clear sky. With the eldest princess order, the vigorous anti-corruption cases among the people were temporarily eased. It didn't disappear. Instead, it went from disorder to order. Countless eyes were fixed on the various yamens in Jingdo. At this critical juncture, even the usually unbridled playboys in Jingdo were tightly restrained by their families. They were terrified that they would cause trouble and become targets in everyone's eyes. Even a small matter would be infinitely magnified to a point where their families couldn't bear it. The Ministry of Justice usually dealt with serious cases. Unless the emperor designated it, the main hall of the Ministry of Justice was usually closed, and complaints of grievances were not allowed in front of the Ministry of Justice. However, this time was different. Each county yamen was about to go crazy, and the Ministry of Justice couldn't be idle either. A bailiff had already come out from inside and kindly helped the woman up from the ground. He kindly asked her what grievances she had suffered and if she had a piece of paper. If she didn't, she could have a bailiff from the Ministry of Justice write one for free. From beginning to end, there wasn't much impatience on their faces. So many people were watching on the street. If one place wasn't handled well, the Ministry of Justice's reputation would be ruined. This was a special time. If something went wrong at this time, it would be strange if the minister didn't skin them alive. Soon, the woman was helped into the hall by a Ministry of Justice runner. Among the onlookers on the street, someone shook his head and said, "In terms of how they treat the common people, the officials of the Ministry of Justice are still the best. Unlike the governor's mansion. I heard that some time ago someone went to the yamen to seek justice, but the people of the yamen didn't care. They even locked the person up for disturbing the yamen. Compared to the Ministry of Justice, the difference is obvious." That's right. As soon as he finished speaking, someone else chimed in. Unfortunately, I was also present at that time. It is said that the young lady's younger sister died. This is a murder case. The people at the capital's magistrate's office are really too careless. I heard that the young lady has been arrested several times. What is the capital magistrate worried about? Another person interrupted. The one who went in just now seems to be the young lady. Why is she in the Ministry of Justice this time? There's such a thing? Someone's face was filled with anger as he quickly walked towards the entrance of the Ministry of Justice. If that's the case, I might have to take a look at this case. I'm going too. Let's go together. At the entrance of the Ministry of Justice, the excited crowd was stopped by the yamen officials. However, they didn't stop them for long. After verifying their identities, someone specially led them in. Based on the principle of fairness and openness, when the Ministry of Justice was conducting a case, the common people were allowed to listen in. The Ministry of Justice claimed that there were laws to abide by, that the law was enforced strictly, and that those who violated the law would be punished. For some cases, the process of handling the case was completely transparent, which won many people's hearts. Of course, in order not to disturb the order of the case, the number of people listening in was still limited to 50. However, although most people couldn't see it with their own eyes, the various details of the case would be passed on through the mouths of these 50 people. In a short period of time, the news would spread throughout the entire capital. In the court, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Lu Yi, patted the gavel and asked, "Who are you?" Where do you live? What are your grievances? Tell me slowly. The woman stood in the court and said softly, Your Excellency, my name is Lin Qin. I live near the city gate of the capital. My younger sister is 16 years old. Her maiden name is Lin Xuanhuan. She used to be a musician at the Miaoying Pavilion. On the night of the 15th of the first month, today's court will be held by Lu Qingtian. This lady is really lucky this time. Every case handled by Lu Qingtian has been solved by him. Not necessarily. It's very likely that the capital governor's residence will be involved in this case. However, I still believe in Lu Qingtian. In the past few years, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Lu Yi, had handled countless cases. No matter how well hidden the criminal was, there was no place for him to hide. This was because he often helped the people and solved ordinary cases. He was deeply loved and respected by the people of the capital. People gave him the nickname of Lu Qingtian. Lu Qingtian had the meaning of the Great Lord of Justice. It also overlapped with the fictional image of Justice Bao in the opera. This was the highest praise the people of the capital had for him. Inside the court, when the woman was complaining about her grievances, people outside the court had already understood. So this woman is Miss Xuanhuan's sister. Miss Xuanhuan's zither skills were unparalleled. It's a pity that she died young. That 100 birds pay homage to the phoenix will never be heard again. What a pity, what a pity! Didn't the capital governor's office say that it was the work of a criminal from the imperial court? Bullshit capital governor's office. One of the people who had been paying attention to the situation inside the court was so angry that his chest heaved up and down. He angrily said, Listen, this lady only wanted to see Miss Xuanhuan's body, but the capital governor's office found a reason to arrest her. Later on, they used a few more reasons to lock her up in prison for almost half a year. If there's nothing fishy going on, I won't believe it even if I beat you to death. At this time, as the woman in the court explained, the case gradually became clear. According to the explanation given by the capital governor's office, on the night of the Upper Yuan dynasty, a criminal from the imperial court hid in the Fine Sound Pavilion. After using extremely cruel methods to kill Miss Xuanhuan, he tried to harm the young master of the Chu family but failed. Then he jumped out of the window and escaped. Even now, although the wanted poster had been posted everywhere, the criminal had not been arrested. If it weren't for the lady standing in the court, perhaps the case would have passed with the passage of time and be forgotten by people. However, her experience and the actions of the capital governor's office added many points of doubt to the case. How did Miss Xuanhuan die? How did the criminal escape the heavy pursuit of the government without leaving a single trace? What role did the capital governor's office play in this case? The entire case suddenly became complicated and confusing. Everyone said that Doi was wronged. This lady's younger sister had died a dubious death. She went to the government to seek redress and was imprisoned for half a year. She had no place to seek redress for her grievances, so how could she not be wronged? Once the case broke out, it quickly attracted the attention of the people of the capital. It also made the Ministry of Justice pay great attention to it. The relevant witnesses of the Fine Sound Pavilion had already been brought to the Ministry of Justice and were heavily protected. The Ministry of Justice had also sent in a request to pull out all the files related to the case from the capital governor's office and reinvestigate the case. They wanted to prove the innocence of the deceased and give the people who were paying attention to the case an explanation. Under these circumstances, Doi's injustice continued to be performed in various brothels in the capital. Every day, countless benefit performances were held. In a certain brothel, Fang looked at Li Yi and said with some heartache, Young master, this stage, this scene, this effect, so much ice and only so little ticket money and so many benefit performances. This time we've suffered a great loss. Li Yi shook his head and looked at him. With sincere and heartfelt words he said, Don't always think about money. You also have to think about contributing to society. Now the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Lu Yiji, is only following that person's orders. That woman is still in prison. How could such a thing happen? She caused trouble twice a few days ago and has already attracted the attention of some people. Without a reason we can't keep her in prison forever. Zheng Shichen shook his head and said, I thought she would be more obedient after being locked up for so long. Who would have thought that as soon as she went out, the people following her were not paying attention and made her kneel in front of the Ministry of Justice? Cui Qingming returned to his seat and calmed down for a while. Then he said in a deep voice, I will take care of this case. Otherwise, if it really gets investigated, not to mention Chu Ping, even you, the capital governor, will not be able to protect yourself. As soon as he finished speaking, a runner came in to report that the Ministry of Justice had arrived. Cui Qingming suddenly stood up from his seat, his face full of shock. How could it be so fast? The case of Miss Xuanhuan of the wonderful Sound Pavilion quickly had new developments. The case file of the capital governor's office that had accepted the case was full of loopholes and could not withstand scrutiny. The coroner who had examined the corpse also revealed the truth under the interrogation of the Ministry of Justice. That night, Miss Xuanhuan was not killed by the criminal. Instead, she was tortured and humiliated to death. As for why the murderer was said to be the criminal who might not have appeared, they would have to ask the young master of the Chu family who was in the same room as Miss Xuanhuan. The Cui family. A middle-aged man slammed the table and said angrily, "How could there be such a big oversight? Does Tsing Shichen not have a brain? Doesn't he know what time it is?" Then a suspicious expression appeared on his face and he muttered, "Could it be Tsing Shichen? What good does this do for him?" Cui Qingming shook his head and said, "This case has attracted the attention of the court and the people. If it is found out, not only will he lose his position as the capital governor, but he will also lose his official position." The middle-aged man revealed a defeated expression. That Louis is a ruthless character. It is said that there is no case that he cannot solve. This time I'm afraid that the Chu family. One Chu family, one capital governor, we. Cui Qingming clenched his fists and asked through gritted teeth, "What's the situation with the Chu family?" The middle-aged man shook his head and said, "The Ministry of Justice has not summoned Chu Ping for the time being, but it should be soon. In that place, no matter how tight-lipped one is, it is inevitable. What about that matter?" The people no longer trust the Chu family. Even those great scholars do not dare to risk universal condemnation and speak casually. After all, this case has too many implications, and the situation is not optimistic. Cui Qingming thought for a long time and loosened his fists. He slowly said, "The Chu family can't be saved, but the capital governor may not." The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Will we also be dragged into this matter?" Cui Qingming shook his head and said, "Tsing Shichen is a smart man. He knows what to do." The Ministry of Justice investigated cases very quickly, and this case was extremely fast. They had no choice but to act quickly. The entire capital was watching the progress of the case, so they did not dare to delay. And this case was actually not complicated. There was no need to summon the grandson of the Grand Tutor. The several bailiffs of the capital government who knew about the case confessed everything not long after they were brought to the Ministry of Justice. They had indeed been pursuing a criminal that day, but the criminal had not been in the fine Sound Pavilion. They had accidentally stumbled upon young Master Chu's deed, only to discover to their shock that young Master Chu, who liked to play tricks, had accidentally strangled the young lady to death. What happened next was logical. The Chu family was a famous noble family in the capital. How could they tolerate such a stain on a member of their family? Naturally, they used the power of the family to cover up this matter. Thus, the cause of Lady Xuanhuan's death became a crime committed by a fugitive. The young master of the Chu family, who was originally the murderer, suddenly became the victim. In order to cover up the truth, they quickly disposed of Lady Xuanhuan's body. When Lady Xuanhuan's sister went to the Yamen to complain, they were afraid that the matter would be exposed, so they also arrested her and threw her into prison. Adding insult to injury, this was simply insane. The injustice of Do Yi was just a play and could not be taken seriously, but Lady Xuanhuan's grievance had really happened right beside them. They had heard it with their own ears, seen it with their own eyes, and had always been paying attention. And during the course of the trial, the bailiffs of the capital government revealed another secret that further solidified Chu Ping's crime. Not long ago, the disappearance of a girl that had caused an uproar actually also had the shadow of this young master of the Chu family. However, this matter was still concealed by the all-powerful Chu family. It was precisely because of this young master of the Chu family's perverted hobby that Lady Xuanhuan had died a wrongful death. Lady Xuanhuan must have been forced by that beast. No wonder it snowed on the night of the Lantern Festival. I originally thought that it was a strange phenomenon that happened once every few decades, but it turns out that the heavens were crying out for Lady Xuanhuan's injustice. To think that I had always thought that the Chu family was the backbone of our Jing kingdom, that Grand Tutor Chu was a just and righteous person, but who would have thought? He still has the cheek to say that Lord Li is a sycophant? What has Lord Li done? He has made great contributions to the country and the people, but he is not the least bit proud of it. He has even repeatedly resigned from his position and refused to be rewarded. And what about him? He covered up for his descendant, causing such a huge injustice. How can he still be called a scholar? He even wants to frame Lord Li, the pillar of our Jing kingdom. If not for Prime Minister Qin and the other officials in the imperial court, I'm afraid. Sycophant, this is a true sycophant. Old and undying, a great traitor to the country. In the court, Lu Qingtian slammed the gavel. Summon Chu Ping. A few bailiffs quickly walked out of the main gate and headed towards the Chu family. At first, there were only a few people following behind them. Soon it became 10, then 100. After passing through an alley, the crowd behind them could no longer be seen. Chapter 900. The Chu family. Is this real or not? Grand Tutor, what should we do? The public's discontent is already boiling outside. They're coming here. Several elders paced back and forth in the hall with anxious expressions on their faces. Because of the Fine Sound Pavilion murder case, the Chu family had already been pushed to the heart of the struggle. As the case progressed, although most of the officials could still maintain their calm due to the prestige of the Grand Tutor, the common people of the capital had already lost trust in the Chu family and the elders. Yesterday, a rather famous scholar had been smashed in the head with a rock for merely saying, "a sycophant harming the country," against County Marquis Li. His body was covered in rotten leaves and he was in an extremely sorry state. When he returned home, even the walls of the courtyard had been pushed down. The cause of all this was the Chu family. The Chu family had won the hearts of the people, but they had also lost the hearts of the people. The old man before them was just an ordinary old man. Grand Tutor Chu sat in a chair with a calm expression. It was impossible to tell what was on his face. He only stared blankly at the door as if in thought, but his eyes were empty. A servant of the Chu family ran in a panic and shouted, "The Ministry of Justice is here." Several constables walked in and slowly bowed to the old man in the chair. The one in the lead said, "Lord Grand Tutor, we suspect that your grandson is related to a serious case. Please come with us, young Master Chu." A middle-aged man rushed out from the side and shouted, "You think you can take Pinger away just because you suspect him?" The constable took out an item from his sleeve and handed it over. He bowed and said, "Lord Chu, this is a warrant from the Ministry of Justice. Please take a look." The middle-aged man didn't even look at the warrant. He said coldly, "How can a member of the Chu family be taken away so easily by the Ministry of Justice? Without His Majesty's imperial edict, I'd like to see who dares to act recklessly in the Chu family." The constable's face showed some difficulty when he heard this. This was the Chu family. The Chu family was different from other family clans. With Grand Tutor Chu present, even the members of the Ministry of Justice could not act too brazenly. Of course, if the Chu family was reasonable, things would naturally go smoothly. If they insisted, they would probably have to seek His Majesty's decree. The constable looked at him and bowed. "If that's the case, we'll take our leave first." After the bailiffs left, the middle-aged man quickly walked up to Grand Tutor Chu and said loudly, "Father, are you going to watch as they take Pinger away?" Xuanhuan is right. The change of dynasties, the rise and fall of clans, these are all fated. How can there be a dynasty that can last for thousands of generations? How can there be a clan that can last forever? Grand Tutor Chu climbed up from the chair with some effort and murmured, "This old man is really old. When one gets old, it's easy to become confused. Father, I'll leave this matter to you." A few constables walked out of the Chu family's door, but they did not leave. This was because in front of them was a crowd that stretched as far as the eye could see. Where is Chu Ping? Why didn't that beast come out? Is it because the Chu family refuses to release him? Before the constables could answer, the crowd had already surged forward. When the Chu family's gatekeeper saw the black mass of people, he was frightened out of his wits and immediately closed the door. "Hand over Chu Ping. Hand over the murderer. Return Lady Xuanhuan's innocence. The people inside, listen up. You have been surrounded. Hurry up and hand over Chu Ping." Inside the Chu family, they heard the deafening shouts coming from outside. Even the ground beneath their feet was trembling. The faces of the elders were pale and their hearts were filled with extreme fear. It was not difficult to imagine how many people were outside from the sound and the situation. Once the Chu family's door was breached, the entire Chu family would be razed to the ground. Inside the Chu family's ancestral hall, an elder with white hair and beard faced the memorial tablet of the Chu family ancestor. He knelt on a praying mat as tears streamed down his face. "Unfilial descendant, you have brought shame to the Chu family ancestor." In the capital's county government, County Magistrate Lu, who was flipping through the case files, jumped in fright when he heard the voice that resounded throughout the capital. He was caught off guard and the pen in his hand fell to the ground. In the imperial palace, Emingzu put down the memorial and slowly walked out of the hall. She looked at the sky outside the palace walls. What's the situation outside? She seemed to be talking to herself. A female official walked over from the side and said respectfully, "Rest assured, Your Highness. I have already sent the imperial guards over. There won't be any trouble." In Hibiscus Garden, Emperor Jing, who was lying on the sickbed, slowly opened his eyes. Changde walked over and closed a window. "Grand Tutor Chu, what a pity," Changde narrowed his eyes and said coldly. "His death is not to be regretted for delaying His Majesty's illness." In the Li family, Li covered the little fellow's ears to prevent him from being frightened by the sounds outside. When the first sound had come, it had startled the little fellow who had been taking an afternoon nap. He immediately bawled. It was not easy to coax him back to sleep, but the sounds outside still continued. His hand covered Li Duan's ears, but a hint of melancholy and pity appeared on his face. At this moment, whether inside or outside the capital, no matter what they were doing, almost everyone stopped what they were doing and raised their heads to look at the sky. In the sky, there were birds fleeing in all directions in fright. Hand over Chu Ping. Hand over Chu Ping. The Chu family. The tightly shut doors slowly opened. Everyone was about to rush in when they saw the old man with the cane in front of them. They could not help but take a few steps back. The deafening sounds also gradually quieted down. "All of this is my fault." Grand Tutor Chu handed his cane to the servant next to him and slowly knelt in front of the crowd. In a hoarse voice he said, "I have let down that lady, let down the ancestors of the Chu family, and let down the people of the world. Grandfather, get up. This is not your fault." After a sigh, a figure limped out from the crowd at the back. He walked in front of Grand Tutor Chu and carefully helped him up. He smiled and said, "It's not a good feeling to kneel. You're already so old. Kneeling like this will hurt your legs." Two servants of the Chu family hurriedly helped Grand Tutor Chu. Chu Ping did not even look at the crowd discussing outside the door. He slowly knelt in front of Grand Tutor Chu and heavily kowtowed. "I didn't mean to kill Lady Xuanhuan. However, it's no longer important to say these things now. You've brought me to so many places in the past, seen so many sceneries and met so many people. I'm really grateful to you." Chu Ping kowtowed again. As he stood up, he said, "Everyone says the capital is good. In the past, when I was outside, I always thought about coming back. Only after coming back did I realize that the capital is actually the most boring place. Thank you. I'm sorry." He stood up and apologized to Grand Tutor Chu. He turned to face the vast crowd outside the Chu family and said loudly, "Everything that I, Chu Ping, have done is my own doing. It has nothing to do with the Chu family." Thud, 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 thud. He knelt down on both knees and heavily kowtowed 3 times to the crowd. After the 3 kowtows there was no more sound. He knelt there silently. The constable closest to him seemed to have thought of something. He took a step forward and gently pushed him. Chu Ping's body fell sideways. A dagger was stabbed straight into his chest. Fresh blood stained his clothes. Chapter 901. Seeing that young Master Chu was clearly no longer breathing, the constable took 2 steps back with a look of disbelief. There was no end to the exclamations in the crowd. No one expected Chu Ping to be dead. He had chosen to commit suicide in front of so many people. Was this suicide to escape punishment or death to atone for his crimes? Pinger. A middle-aged man rushed out from the Chu family crowd and picked up the corpse on the ground. His face was filled with grief as he wailed out loud. Grand Tutor Chu's body went limp. Fortunately, the Chu family servants behind him supported him, preventing him from falling. After he straightened his body, he waved away the Chu family servants who were supporting him and walked to the constable. He asked in a hoarse voice, "Are you taking his corpse away as well?" The constable immediately took 2 steps back and bowed. The evidence in this case was conclusive. If Chu Ping were still alive, he would naturally be brought to the Ministry of Justice for interrogation. But since he was dead, he had to leave some face for the Chu family. Chu Ping's corpse was brought in and the Chu family's main door slowly closed. The crowd outside stood in front of the Chu family for a long time, but ultimately did not rush in. Pui? What bullsh** t? Someone spat viciously at the Chu family's main door before turning to leave. Someone said angrily, "Pui? That old sycophant. Chu Ping is dead. Miss Xuanhuan should rest in peace." Another person sighed and walked a few steps before turning back to face the Chu family's main door. Pui. On this day, nearly all the citizens of the capital came to the Chu family's front door for a tour. Although everyone had left, the Chu family's front door had become filthy. Even the signboard on the front door had been smashed down. A noble family of a generation had been reduced to such a state overnight. It also made countless officials and nobles in the capital realize how powerful the commoners they usually looked down on were. Chu Ping had committed suicide to atone for his crimes, but the Chu family's matter was not over yet. When Grand Tutor Chu was still a scholar in the Jing kingdom, he had cleansed the emperor's side and admonished the emperor. This was a matter of great moral integrity. But now that his moral integrity had been stripped away, all he had done was to slander the important officials of the court, form a clique for personal gain, harbor evil intentions, and even commit treason such as forcing the emperor to leave the Golden Palace. Moreover, he had harbored criminals and abused his power for personal gain. How could he escape the punishment of the law? Every generation of Grand Tutors had resigned due to old age. Grand Tutor Chu was the only one who had been stripped of his title by the imperial court. Chu Ping's father had also been stripped of his official position. A loyal official became a sycophant, a clean stream became a dirty stream, an upright official became a treacherous official, and then became an upright official again. Just like these days in the capital, the storm rose and then calmed and then rose again. The injustice of Doi came to an end and there was a new show in the brothel. The storm had calmed down a bit and only a few ripples remained, enough to serve as a side dish for the people of the capital. You're talking about that sycophant. In a bun shop, a scholar in a scholarly robe had just spoken when a bun flew from the front and smashed into his face, followed by an angry voice. Who are you calling a sycophant? Say it again. The scholar picked up the bun that had fallen to the ground and looked at the shopkeeper of the bun shop. He said in a daze, I said that Grand Tutor Chu was a scholar, loved and respected by the people and trusted by the officials. Who would have thought that he would do such a thing to ruin his reputation? It's really? The shopkeeper of the bun shop looked surprised. Ah, you mean that old sycophant? Who else could it be? The owner of the bun shop waved his hand and said awkwardly, Hi, I'm really sorry. I got addicted to smashing you scholars a while ago. It's fine. That bun is on me, it's free. The Chu family has now completely declined. No one in the capital is willing to have anything to do with them. After the reform of the law, the pressure on the government has increased a lot. Fortunately, after that period of busyness, the pressure has lessened a lot. Most cases are actually not that complicated, and it's not every day that there's a case of injustice. Without Grand Tutor Chu leading the way, that matter can be considered to have completely calmed down. Emingzi looked at Li Yi and sighed. It's finally over. After a long time without receiving a response, she extended her hand and waved it in front of Li Yi's eyes. Li Yi came back to his senses and asked, what did you just say? Emingzi looked at him and finally waved her hand. Nothing. How is this the end? Li Yi shook his head. He lifted the curtain of the carriage and said, This is just the beginning. He jumped down from the carriage and walked towards a building in front of him. It was an ancestral hall. In the ancestral hall there was a stone tablet. The people of the capital lined up like flowing water. After placing an incense stick in front of the stone tablet, they left through the other side. Li Yi lined up and placed an incense stick in front of the stone tablet. He then stood to the side for a while before walking out. Emingzi was still standing next to the carriage looking at another carriage. A green-clothed manservant walked over from that side. He bowed and said respectfully, My master invites you over. Li Yi looked at him and asked, Who is your master? You'll know when you get there, my lord. Li Yi looked at the carriage that was parked in the corner and walked towards it. As he walked to the side of the carriage, the curtain was lifted by a withered hand, revealing a face covered in wrinkles. The old man seemed to have aged another 10 years since the last time he had seen him. Li Yi cupped his hands and said, Grand Tutor, long time no see. Behind the curtain, the old man looked at him emotionlessly and said in a hoarse voice, You once asked me if it was worth it. For my own selfishness I buried the entire Chu clan. It was indeed not worth it. He shook his head, his eyes suddenly becoming sharp. But the eldest imperial son returning to the capital to inherit the throne is natural. Have you ever thought about what you are doing? What you are doing is worth it. Just what do you want? He looked at Li Yi and asked, Prince Jin is young and you have no contact with the other princes. Tell me just what do you want? Li Yi looked at him and slowly asked, Grand Tutor, do you really want to know? Grand Tutor Chu said nothing and only stared fixedly at him. Since Grand Tutor wants to know. Li Yi shook his head and walked into the carriage. Grand Tutor Chu leaned forward. He moved his head closer and whispered, I won't tell you. Chapter 902. As the carriage drove past, there was a violent cough coming from inside. Emingzu turned back to look at Li Yi. "What did you say to Grand Tutor?" Li Yi shook his head. "Nothing." Emingzu looked at the carriage in front again. The coughing gradually faded away. She continued to look at him with a look that said, "Do you believe me?" "I swear on the honor of a sycophant." Li Yi raised 4 fingers. "I really didn't say anything to him." The main reason for the Chu family's demise was not the Cui family. Under normal circumstances, the 2 crimes that Chu Ping had committed, according to the previous laws of the Jing kingdom, were nothing more than a high-class person killing a low-class person and having to pay some silver taels. Even Chu Ping himself might not be severely punished. The real reason was Grand Tutor Chu. From his inaction in the beginning or his shielding to his worsening later, Grand Tutor Chu could not turn back, nor could the Chu family. All of this was caused by Grand Tutor Chu, who cherished his reputation and was extremely famous. The Chu family rose because of its reputation, and was also dragged down by it. It was a century-old family that had fallen to such a state. He had once asked Grand Tutor Chu whether it was worth it or not. Grand Tutor Chu did not answer but gave the answer with his actions. But no matter what, this old man was once prominent and was still watched by countless people. If he was told that the king of Shu was not his majesty's biological son, and that he wanted Emingzu to be the empress, Grand Tutor Chu might have a heart attack or a brain hemorrhage. If he was not careful, he would not be able to clear his name. The 2 did not get on the carriage again but walked back. When they were about to walk past the ancestral hall, 2 figures walked toward them. The middle-aged man walking in front raised his head and was slightly stunned. He immediately cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, Your Highness." "Greetings, Lord Li." Emingzu turned back to look at Li Yi, the doubt in her eyes obvious. "Qin He, the 5th son of Prime Minister Qin." Li Yi explained to her, then looked at 5th Master Qin and pointed at his hair, his eyes full of doubt. "Oh, about that." 5th Master Qin smiled and said, "I'm old, so I'm not like you young people." Li Yi nodded and then slightly cupped his hands. "Thank you, Prime Minister Qin, for dealing with the matters in the court recently. Please thank him on my behalf. I will personally visit him another day to thank him. My father is only doing what he thinks is right. We can't say anything." 5th Master Qin shook his head and said, "However, I will convey Lord Li's message." Li Yi looked at the ancestral hall behind him and asked, "Did you also come to pay your respects to Lady xuanhuan?" 5th Master Qin nodded and said, "Although Lady xuanhuan is no longer here, her death is meaningful. There are so many people who remember her, and there are countless people who are deeply grateful to her. Her death alone accomplished something that the entire court could not do. It is worthy of worship." On the way back, Emingzu looked at him and asked, "Is he Qin He, the Qin He that Uncle Wang mentioned?" "What, he doesn't look like him." She shook her head and said, "I just feel that a person who is worthy of Uncle Wang's evaluation shouldn't be like this." Don't be fooled by this 5th master of the Qin clan's sloppy appearance. Li Yi smiled and said, "He's a truly powerful person." In the ancestral hall, after the 2 of them burned incense in front of the stone tablet, they entered the ancestral hall. As soon as they entered, they saw a statue of a woman the size of a normal person. Below the statue was a spacious platform. After people burned incense outside, they would place the things they brought to pay their respects on this platform. The burly man asked mysteriously, "5th Master, the person beside Lord Li just now was the princess? What, do I not look like her?" 5th Master Qin casually asked as he placed a plate of pastries in the box on the platform. "To be honest, she doesn't look like her." The burly man nodded. Just as he was wondering why he hadn't noticed before, he suddenly heard a cracking sound. He turned his head to look at 5th Master beside him and said in surprise, "5th Master, where did you get the apple in your hand?" 5th Master Qin casually pointed to the fruit plate on the platform that was clearly missing an apple. "There, it tastes pretty good. Do you want it?" "This?" The burly man looked at him in disbelief. "This was given to Lady xuanhuan by someone else." "5th Master, you, xuanhuan?" 5th Master Qin shook his head and said, "She doesn't like eating apples. It's a waste to keep it." Crack. Another sound. "What are you doing over there?" At this moment, there were still many people in the ancestral hall. When someone raised his head and saw this scene, he immediately stood up in anger. "You even dare to eat something given to Lady xuanhuan? Has your conscience been eaten by a dog? What, who did it? Take them to the officials." The burly man grabbed an apple and grabbed 5th Master Qin's arm. He hurriedly said, "What are you waiting for? Run." A moment later, in an alley in Jingdo, 5th Master Qin panted heavily. He patted a footprint on his body and asked, "What, how is this apple?" The burly man took a bite and nodded. "It's crispy and sweet. Why doesn't Lady Xuanhuan like it?" Fifth Master Qin leaned against the wall and sighed. "Yes, I also don't understand why she doesn't like it." He was silent for a moment. After waiting for the burly man to finish eating the apple, he said, "Wu heir, how long have you been following me?" The burly man froze for a moment. In the next moment he threw away the apple and clapped his hands. Solemnly he said, "Fifth Master, tell me, what do you want me to do this time?" "Go follow the little duke and see what he's been doing these days. I'm the best at following people." The burly man patted his chest. "With me doing things, Fifth Master can rest assured. The trail is broken." Li Yi sighed and said, "How could it be broken?" Lu Yi shook his head and said, "The Ministry of Justice and the Secret Intelligence Bureau couldn't find anything. The person behind this case must have great power in Jingdo." Li Yi rubbed the space between his brows and suddenly felt a headache coming on. He tilted his head to look at the princess and said helplessly, "Now there's only the Chui family left. Why don't we choose another path?" Emingzi looked at him and asked in confusion, "What path?" "I know a path that leads directly to the central lake of the Academy of Mathematics. If we go at night, we'll definitely not be discovered. Why don't we take advantage of the darkness and wind? Sink the Chui family into the lake. You also think this is a good idea, right? It's simple, convenient, and saves time. Do you want me to help you kidnap Consort Chui out of the palace?" "If you can help, that would be great." Li Yi met her eyes. Lu Yi quickly looked out the window. A moment later, Li Yi shook his head and said, "Forget it. It's dark and I can't see the road clearly. Let's think about it at length. If the Chui family could be taken down so easily, father wouldn't have waited until now." Emingzi shook her head and said, 20 years ago, their power had already seeped into every corner of the imperial court. They also have a good reputation among the people. Although they are not as powerful as before, they still have a foundation that cannot be underestimated." Li Yi sighed and said, "That's why I said it's more convenient to choose another path." Fang strode in from outside and handed him an envelope. He said, "Young master, there's news from Wu heir." Li Yi opened the envelope and looked at it. He handed it to Lu Yi and said with a smile, "Isn't it connected now?" Chapter 903. Li Yi handed the letter to Lu Yishui and said, "Keep an eye on Qinyu. You should be able to find something." Lu Yishui took the letter and looked at it. He nodded and said, "I understand." Emingzi seemed to understand what he wanted to do. When she walked into the courtyard, she turned around and asked, "Are you going to deal with the Chui family the same way you dealt with the Chu family?" "The Chui family has many henchmen. They won't do many things themselves. As long as the matter of the king of Shu is not exposed, unless the Chui family is plotting a rebellion, it won't have much impact on the general situation." Li shook his head and said, "Let's take one step at a time. A dam of 1,000 miles will collapse because of an ant's nest. If we add up all the things one by one, it might be the last straw that breaks the camel's back." Mingzhu's tone was firm. "We can't let father know about that matter no matter what." "Of course I know that. Otherwise the Chui family will die countless times for this crime." Li Yi had thought about this contradiction many times. It was obvious that it was easy to destroy the Chui family through that matter, but it was easier to destroy the old emperor. They couldn't take this risk. The two reached a tacit understanding on this matter. There was nothing to discuss. Li Yi saw Mississippi Lu on the other side of the courtyard. She seemed to have just finished practicing. He thought for a moment and waved his hand. "Rui, come here for a moment." Mississippi Lu put down autumn water and walked over. She cast an inquiring look at him. Li Yi looked at the two standing together. After a moment, he looked at Mississippi Lu and said in surprise, "I find that you have been growing recently. I remember that you were shorter than the princess at the beginning. Now you are the same height." Mississippi Lu looked at him. "When have I ever been shorter than her?" "Ah, you didn't?" Li shook his head and said, "Then I must have remembered wrongly again. I don't know what happened to my memory recently." Li walked the princess out the door and saw sister-in-law Fang walking over from afar. When he saw the person beside her, he was instantly stunned. He closed his eyes in disbelief, and when he opened them again, sister-in-law Fang was already talking to the woman beside her with a smile. Li looked back at Mississippi Lu and asked, "Who's the girl next to Mrs. Fang? I've never seen her before." Mississippi Lu looked in that direction and said, "Yesterday when Aunt Fang went to the temple to offer incense, she met Miss Xiao on the road. Miss Xiao came to the capital to seek shelter with her relatives, but she couldn't find her and was robbed of her traveling expenses. Aunt Fong pitied her and temporarily took her in. Miss Xiao. Li nodded and sighed. Sister-in-law Fong is really kind. Sister-in-law Fong actually treats people very well, and Uncle Fong is also not bad. It's just that he looks a little fierce usually, Li nodded. Speaking of which, you two are quite similar, but you don't know how to use a broom when you fight, which is much better than her. Mississippi Lou's temper had really improved recently, and Li couldn't help but feel that his youth was gone forever. She could even cook a bowl of noodles that tasted pretty good by herself. The unruly, willful, unreasonable, and unworldly Mississippi Lou seemed to be gone forever. Of course, the person who made him feel that time could change a person the most was Fong. He had quietly sent sister-in-law Fong's biggest enemy to her side, and the two of them could get along with each other like sisters. There was harmony inside and outside the house. Li didn't think he had the ability to do so. Some things have to be faced. I don't have the ability of the son-in-law, so of course I have to find another way. When Fong said this, his face was shrouded in a sacred glow. For him this was indeed a big deal. To be able to let sister-in-law Fong and Little Red get along like sisters, this was simply a fantasy, unbelievable, and something that he didn't even dare to think about in the past. In contrast, his own affairs were more difficult to deal with. Although drunk Mo's tone had relaxed these days, it seemed that she was still not completely mentally prepared. And this was just drunk Mo. The road was long and the revolution had not yet succeeded. Comrades still needed to work hard. In the old house of the Zheng family, drunk Mo helped them make tea. When they walked back to the room, Tsing Shichen said, "After this incident, the Chui family probably doesn't trust me much anymore." This did not come as a surprise to Li Yi. That case involved a lot of people and it was the focus of the entire capital. Removing him from it would undoubtedly be a hell of a challenge. One careless move and it would cause a wave of public opinion. When the Chui family knew that they couldn't protect the Chu family, they had actually used the power of the court to protect him, the capital governor. However, they encountered great obstacles and in the end they had no choice but to stop. In this way, the subsequent reversal of public opinion seemed extremely suspicious. With the protection of that girl, if the Chui family still didn't suspect them, they would have been eaten up in the capital. Although the king of Shu is still in Shuzhou, as long as his majesty doesn't appoint a crown prince, he is still the most promising. Tseng Shichen looked at him and said slowly, "Once something happens to his majesty, the king of Shu will inherit the throne. This is almost without a doubt. Until now, are you still not willing to tell me which side you are on? Although the Chui family probably won't do anything to you, you still have to be careful." Li didn't answer. He just warned him and turned to go inside. A thoughtful look appeared on Tseng Shichen's face. After a moment, he dipped his finger in the tea and wrote 2 words on the table. Soon he crossed out the 2 words Prince Jean on the stone table. In the situation where his majesty still had adult princes, the possibility of a child inheriting the throne was too small. For the sake of the overall situation, his majesty would not make such a choice. On this point, Li definitely knew better than he did. As for the other princes, whether it was status or talent, they were far inferior. More importantly, those princes were far away in their fiefdoms, and Li Yi had no contact with them. Apart from Prince Jean, among the princes, there was not a single one who had both a high status and a close relationship with him. However, he had a close relationship with the princesses. She had offended the king of Shu for Princess Yongning, causing the Chui family to see him as a thorn in their side. Princess Xianning was also very close to him, and there was no barrier when they got along. As for the eldest princess, needless to say, it was said that they were close friends when they were in Qing'an Prefecture. In the past few years in the capital, the eldest princess established the Women's College and the Women's Union. She was deeply loved by the women in the capital, and founded the academy, which won the hearts of the scholars in the world. Ever since she took over the government, all the civil and military officials in the court would praise the eldest princess when they mentioned her. There were countless officials in the court who were as loyal to her as they were to his majesty. Who would still dare to treat her as a woman? Not to mention, great scholar Chu's actions backfired and he lost the hearts of the people. Her Highness reformed the law, which was also applauded by the people. Behind all these things, there was actually his shadow. It was strange that he didn't know what he was thinking. Instead of supporting a prince, he spared no effort to do these things for the eldest princess. What was he thinking? Tsing Shichen picked up the teacup and put it down again, the expression on his face frozen. Chapter 904. In the room, Madame Chen was teaching drunken ink embroidery. For the daughters of the noble families in the capital city, Embroidery was a necessary skill. Most of them would embroider their wedding dresses with their own hands before they got married. Seeing Li Yi come in, she quickly hid the wedding dress. Li Yi didn't know what she was thinking. She actually looked at the wedding dress more secretively than the belly band. He had even seen her wearing the belly band several times, but she didn't even show him a wedding dress that wasn't embroidered. Madame Qin put their hands together and said, "You two, it's time to pick a day and set the date early. You can't keep dragging it on like this." It's still early?" Drunken Ink lowered her head and whispered. Li Yi glanced at her and said, "What do you mean it's still early?" "It's not early." Watching her break free from his hand and run out quickly, Li Yi shook his head helplessly. Although she usually looked very bold, after the two of them got closer, she became shy. Third Miss Qin looked at her running out with a smile. After a long time, she turned her head and sighed, saying, "You are still young and don't know the dangers of the court. A family can live in peace and harmony. Even if it's a little dull, it's much better than facing those deceitful battles every day." Li Yi lowered his head but didn't speak. No one liked to live in deceit and conspiracy all day long. Compared with this, wasn't it more interesting to play with the children, Rui, and the proud Lolita at home? If you want stability, you must first endure turbulence. She looked outside the door. The two women were talking about something. She turned back and said, "I think Ruoqing is also thinking about you. Although Drunken Ink is here, you can't always ignore her. I can see that her heart is actually more bitter than anyone else. You can't let her down." "I know." Li looked outside the door and nodded. "I won't." She looked at Li Yi, and a rare hint of resentment appeared on her face. "Your father was so devoted back then. In order to elope with your mother, he didn't even want the inheritance of his family. Why is it that when it comes to you, you just have to provoke so many debts of love?" An awkward expression appeared on Li Yi's face. Unable to refute, he could only remain silent. She patted the back of Li Yi's hand and said, "All right, it's your good fortune to be able to gain the favor of so many wonderful people. I only hope that in the future you won't hurt anyone's heart." After saying that, he stood up and said with a smile, "When it comes to you, I can't help but talk too much. Accompany them well, I'm going back." Li Yi stood up at the same time and saw her out. He watched as Qinsheng walked out of the tea house across the street. A servant girl of the Qin estate helped her into the carriage. Just as Qinsheng was about to get into the other carriage, Li Yi suddenly asked, "Is official Qin this free every day?" Qinsheng's hand, which had already lifted the curtain, lowered again. He countered with a question, "Could it be that official Li plans to go to the princess and report me?" "I'm not the kind of person who would report on someone." Li Yi shook his head. "I just want to advise official Chen that you are an official of the imperial court. Every month there will be a few days where you have to pretend to be working hard. Of course, other than this, I also have a small matter to remind official Chen." He slightly lowered his voice and said, "Stay as far away from the Chui clan as possible." A scornful expression appeared on Qinsheng's face. Just as he was about to speak, he heard the second half of Chen Changxing's words and froze. He asked, "What do you mean?" "Official Chen will understand." Li looked at him and said once more. Then he turned and walked back into the courtyard. Qinsheng was left standing there, his expression solemn. Thousands of thoughts had already flashed through his mind, and in the end they all boiled down to a certain message. The Chui clan was probably going to change. When Li Yi walked back, Zuemo walked out of the room and asked, "Has Madame Qin left?" "She's gone back." Li Yi walked over and put his arm around her slender waist. "She asked me to spend more time with you too." Who asked you to spend more time?" She looked frantically at Zheng Shichen, who was sitting in the courtyard drinking tea, and hurriedly pushed him away. Then she seemed to realize something. Looking at him, she asked uncertainly, "You too?" Li Yi turned and walked quickly in Zheng Shichen's direction. "Lord Zheng, what do you think about that matter just now?" "I think that the king of Shu has no talent or virtue and is indeed not suitable for the throne. Otherwise, the country that His Majesty and the courtiers have painstakingly stabilized would probably be destroyed in his hands." Zheng Shichen thought for a moment and said, "Among the many princes, His Highness King Jin is an outstanding person, and his status is equally noble. However, King Jin is too young and it is difficult for him to ascend to the throne. At present, apart from His Majesty, the only one who can govern the country well is the eldest princess. However, the eldest princess has already set a precedent by assisting the government." "It is really—" Li looked at him in surprise and asked, "Is this what we were talking about just now?" What Zheng Shichen said was very reasonable. In fact, the more they talked about it, the more he felt how difficult it was to let Mingzu wear that uniform and experience the temptation of the dragon robe. Their original purpose was just to prevent this great country from falling into the hands of the king of Shu. Now the king of Shu had been eliminated in advance. She did not want the old emperor to know about this, but she would never agree to let the Li family's country fall into the hands of others. In the pavilion in the middle of the lake, Her Highness nodded. That's right. No matter what, this country cannot fall into the hands of the king of Shu. This pavilion had become a place where the two of them talked in secret more and more frequently. Because there was lake water everywhere and the sound of waves was mixed in, unless someone had clairvoyance and hearing, they would not be able to hear what they were talking about. He looked around. There seemed to be a flash of light in the trees by the shore of the lake and disappeared in an instant. Mingzu suddenly said, King Ning has returned to Qin and prefecture. Li looked back at her and asked, It is already June. They should have returned long ago. What is so strange about this? It is because King Ning has returned that it is strange. Mingzu shook her head and said, This time only King Ning has returned and taken the military seal. It is enough to mobilize 2,000 soldiers. What can 2,000 soldiers do? It is enough to confiscate the ancestral home of the Chui family in Qingyan prefecture. As for rebellion, I'm afraid it is far from enough. Li Mingzhu looked at the surface of the lake for a long time before turning around. A hint of confusion appeared on her face. I suspect that Fu Huang and Ning Wangshu are hiding something from us, and from the court officials. I can't see it. In the low trees by the lake, Li Xian looked at the two people in the pavilion with their backs facing him and murmured helplessly. With great difficulty he saw Mingzu turn around. He immediately became alert and tightened his grip on the binoculars in his hands. I am pregnant with father, the emperor, from the court officials? He frowned and murmured, You spoke so fast, how can I hear you clearly? A look of doubt surfaced on his face. What exactly was Mingzhu thinking? She had hidden it from Uncle Huang and the court officials. She seemed to be at a loss. Clatter. As if realizing something, he sucked in a cold breath. Shock appeared on his face. The binoculars in his hands suddenly fell to the ground and he jumped out of the bushes. Li Yi and Mingzu raised their heads and saw Li Xian, who was wearing a garland made of tree branches and decorated with a few small flowers. Surprise appeared on their faces at the same time. Chapter 905. Today, Li Xian was dressed in dark clothes, and the wreath of branches on his head was particularly eye-catching. If he smeared some camouflage paint on his face he would look even more like the real deal. I saw what you said just now. He ran all the way here, panting heavily, and the shock on his face had not faded. Li did not know why he was dressed like this and asked in surprise, What did you see? Li Xian pointed at the binoculars hanging around his neck, and Li Yi was even more confused. Li Xian looked at the two of them and his eyes were filled with extreme surprise. I don't need to listen to what you're saying. I only need to look at your lips to know what you're saying. Li Yi looked at him and his expression was slightly shocked. You've learned to read lips? Without waiting for Li Xian to nod, he remembered that during this period of time, whenever the two of them spoke, he would always stare at his own lips. Could it be that he was really learning to read lips? Then he looked at the binoculars hanging around his neck. Could it be that the purpose of him learning to read lips was to peep and eavesdrop? This guy, what was going on in his mind? Li Yi's lips moved and he asked in disbelief, Did you see what I said just now? It's useless even if you scold me. Li Xian's gaze swept back and forth between the two of them and he said, I've already seen what you've said just now. Li Yi and Mingzu looked at each other, and they both felt a headache coming on. The reason why the two of them chose this place was to avoid Li Xian. After all, with his character of wanting to see the world in chaos, if he knew about this matter he might cause some trouble. But no matter how careful they were, they never expected that he would purposely learn to read lips, and the binoculars hanging around his neck were probably high-quality products from the Academy of Science. How could there be such a bored person in the world? This is really too disgraceful. A worried expression appeared on Li Xian's face. He looked at Mingzu and said with a pained expression, You are the princess, you too, how could you do such a thing? Looking at the extremely agitated Li Xian, Li looked back at Mingzu and said, Why don't we sink into the lake? Looks like we can't hide it anymore. Li sighed and looked at Mingzu again and asked, You or me? Li Mingzhu waved her hand and sat on a stone chair to the side. She looked at the calm lake and said, Speak. Li nodded. He looked at Li Xian and asked again, What did you hear just now? You don't have to test me. Li Xian glanced at the two of them and said, if the imperial uncle, the court officials, and the entire world were to find out about this disgraceful and heinous act, the two of you would no longer have a place in the Jing kingdom. Li Yi shook his head. It seemed that he was really bored to a certain extent and indeed learned to read lips. At this point there was no need to test him anymore. You know, although the king of Shu has been chased to Shu province and his reputation has been ruined, he is still the eldest son of the emperor. If something happens to his majesty, he will most likely make a comeback and even ascend the throne. Li Yi looked at him and said, the princes of his majesty have no talent or virtue. If the world falls into their hands, it will end in defeat sooner or later. We have come step by step to where we are today, and we can't let the court go back to its original path. Moreover, with the power in Mingzhu's hands, she will not have a good ending for any of the princes who succeed the throne. Hearing this, Li Xian's face darkened. How could he not understand this logic? Only Uncle Emperor was broad-minded enough to allow the eldest princess to rule the country, and hand over all the affairs of the country to her. Until now, most of the court officials had acquiesced to the eldest princess's existence. But if the new emperor succeeded the throne, he would definitely not allow these powers to be held in the hands of a princess. Even the Academy of Sciences would be out of his control. The precondition for their peace was that Uncle Huang was still in control of the country. Once he was gone, many people's fates would be turned upside down. However, although this was the truth, it had nothing to do with what they said. That was not the point. One was an unmarried princess, and the other was an important official with a family. The two of them were together secretly and no one would find out and everything would be fine. But now that Mingzhu was pregnant, they could not hide it for long. Once this matter was made public, it would become the biggest scandal in the royal family, and the two of them would be condemned by everyone. Even if they could keep their lives, they would no longer have a place in the Jing kingdom. Why are you so careless? Li Xian looked at them exasperatedly and sighed and said, go to a place where no one knows you and don't come back. Let me finish first. Li Yi looked at him calmly and Li Xian looked at him, lowered his head and said, go ahead. Actually, Prince Jin is the most suitable person to inherit His Majesty's position. Li Yi looked in the direction of the arithmetic school and said slowly, but he is too young and can't take up the heavy responsibility, so, why are you saying this to me at this time? Shut up, let me finish. After Li Xian completely shut up, Li Yi said again, so, we have to push Mingzhu to that position. Li Xian was stunned and looked at him in surprise and asked, push to what position? His Majesty's position. Li Xian looked at him and then looked at Mingzhu and rubbed his head and waved his hand. Wait a minute, I'm a little confused now, let me sort it out first. After a long time he raised his head again and asked, isn't Mingzhu pregnant? Her Royal Highness stood up abruptly and her pretty face blushed. She looked at him and said angrily, what nonsense are you talking about? Li Xian said in a daze, I clearly saw that you said you were pregnant. How long have you been learning to read lips? Li Yi thought for a moment and suddenly asked. Less than a month, Li Xian said after thinking for a moment. Li Yi looked straight at him and asked, you rushed over because you thought Mingzhu was pregnant? Li Xian nodded and said confidently, what else could it be? What you said just now, was it because of this? Li Yi rubbed his forehead and asked again. Li Xian was surprised and said, could it be that Mingzhu is not pregnant and I'm seeing things? After saying that, he suddenly had a look of realization and looked straight at Li Yi. Wait, what did you say just now? What position should we push Mingzhu to? Li Yi sighed and turned to look at Mingzhu. Why don't we just sink? Chapter 906. Such an important matter. Li Xian's face was gloomy as he paced back and forth in the pavilion. Occasionally he pointed at the two of them. Li Yi and Mingzhu were both silent. Influenced by their traditional education and beliefs, this was the first time they had heard of this matter. It was indeed difficult for them to accept. How dare you not tell me? Li Xian slammed his palm on the stone table and asked angrily, such an important matter, how dare you hide it from me? Are you not treating me as one of your own? The anger on his face only lasted for a moment before disappearing in the next moment. He clapped his hands and said with a face full of surprise, why didn't I think of this idea before? To him, it would be best if he could maintain the current status quo. However, no matter who inherited the throne with his identity and position, he would not have a good life in the capital. However, who was Mingzhu? She had grown up with him and the three heroes of the capital had gone through thick and thin together. It was as if they were wearing the same pants. Although it was the two of them who were wearing the same pants now, based on the current situation, if Emmingsa could really sit on the throne, it would definitely be the best outcome. However, although she was also the child of the emperor, she was a woman. Would it be difficult for a woman to become the emperor? Thinking about it carefully, the dragon robe did not look good on her either. This matter is not certain yet. Let's not talk about it for now. Li pressed on his shoulder to calm him down. He said, "You cannot tell anyone about what happened today, including His Majesty, your father, mother, the crown princess, and your brother Xin. Don't worry, I know the severity of this matter. Other than the three of us, I will not let a fourth person know." Li Xian nodded solemnly, then said, "Based on what you said, the biggest obstacle in front of us now is the Chui family. The Chui family has done such a rebellious thing, and they are still jumping around in the court all day long. It is really annoying to see. Should we go all out?" He turned his head to look. "I think this lake in the academy is not bad." Although he didn't know from whom did Li Xian learn this unreliable idea of sinking into the lake, he was right about one thing. As long as the Chui family didn't fall, they wouldn't have peaceful days. This time it was fine if they didn't make a move, but if they made a move, the Chui family wouldn't be able to make a comeback once and for all. As for the secret between the two of them being known by him, it did not affect them much. Li Xian, who was born with a short brain, was muddle-headed on many things, but he had never messed up on a major matter. At least he knew that in the future he wouldn't be like before, always causing trouble at the drop of a hat. He came out to wander around after learning half of lip reading and ended up making such a big mistake. However, this incident also reminded him that there were even perverts in this world who specialized in lip reading and hid in the dark with binoculars to peep at him. In the future, no matter what he did, it was better to be extra careful. After stepping into the house, all the messy thoughts in his mind disappeared. Wife, children, sister-in-law, and the little servant girl who was about to grow up and was gradually getting rid of the silly adorable. This was another small world, blocking all the things that were incompatible with the word home, outside. Mississippi Lu was holding a piece of paper in her hand and saying something to Rui. It was probably because she encountered some words that she didn't know. Rui was the kind of person who could calm down no matter what she did. When the two sisters were young, they also did literacy and other things, but it was probably useless for Mississippi Lu. Li picked up a few pieces of paper that were messily placed on the table and looked at them. Most of them were about the Lu League. The Lu League had already formed a stable system. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was an organization. The elite disciples were all skilled in martial arts. They were famous martial arts masters on the master ranking list and the chivalry ranking list. As for other places, it was more of a relationship similar to a contract. There were many masters in the league and they had strong financial support. They took what they needed from the people in the martial arts world and cooperated with tacit understanding. It could be said that they had completely changed the current situation of the martial arts world. As the leader of the Lu League, Mississippi Lu's growth was amazing. Of course, this did not refer to a specific part of her body. Other than physical growth, there was also psychological growth. Thinking back to 3 years ago, the girl in white who was riding on a horse and holding a sword, and now the girl who frowned and bit her thumb, staring at the piece of paper in front of her seriously, were like two different people. There was another stack of papers on the table. Li also flipped through them. They were all information about the Wu Kingdom. As the only country in the vicinity that had fallen into internal strife, although the imperial court of the Wu Kingdom was strong, there were too many rebels and traitors in the country. It could not be suppressed in a short time. The surrounding countries might have some other ideas besides watching them make a fool of themselves. Seeing him walk in, Rui seemed to have seen her savior. She hurriedly said, "Aya, my husband is back. Quickly help Rui take a look at what's written on this. I've been having a headache these past few days." The reason why Rui had a headache was that Mississippi Lu would ask her whenever she encountered something that she did not understand. In fact, Rui only recognized a few more words than her. When it came to the meaning of poems and articles, she would also have a headache. As for why Mississippi Lu did not ask him directly, Li also felt strange. After Rui spoke, Mississippi Lu reluctantly handed the paper to him. Li glanced at it and knew the reason why Mississippi Lu had a headache. This was something similar to the Imperial Court's spy report. The words and sentences were not like ordinary letters. It was very official and difficult to understand. It was normal for people like Mississippi Lu, who were still in the stage of literacy, to not understand it. Li looked at it and said, "It says that Princess Duanrong of the Wu Kingdom joined forces with a traitor and conquered 2 provinces of the Wu Kingdom in a row. She was captured alive by the Imperial Court and will be executed in a few days." What? Mississippi Lu's expression changed dramatically. Of course it's a lie. Li put the paper aside and said, it's true that they conquered 2 provinces. They have a lot of soldiers under their command. They used to be in the military camp and have good strength. Now they are in a stalemate with the imperial court of the Wu kingdom. Nothing will happen in a short time. Mississippi Lu took a deep breath, and her chest rose and fell a few times. She looked at him and said, come here, I'll show you something good. Did she think he was stupid? If he went with her now, nothing good would come out of it. Li Yi took Li Duan from Rui's arms. After such a long time of guidance, the 8-month-old little guy could make clearer father and mother. Of course he still called Xuanhuan more often. Rui sat down beside him and said softly, I went to see Sister Zumo today. Li Yi turned to look at her. I've already talked to Sister Zumo. She said that after a few days she will move in with us. Li Yi looked at her in surprise. She agreed? Rui looked at him in confusion and asked, why not? Li Yi suddenly doubted the meaning of life. He nagged her about this matter every day. All his efforts were not as good as a word from Rui? This was a bit too hurtful. When he walked out of the door gloomily, he met a little maid who came in. She looked up at him and said, young master, second miss asked you to go to her room. She has a question to ask you. What question could he not ask just now? Why did he have to go to her room? Walking to Mississippi Lu's room on the other side, the door was open. Li knocked on the door and stepped in. Mississippi Lu sat at the table, looked up and said, close the door. Li closed the door, then turned his head and asked in confusion, what's the problem? Why close the door? Chapter 907. At the door of Mississippi Lu's room, Xuanhuan leaned against a pillar while munching on melon seeds. She carefully listened to the movements inside the room. Inside the room, Li Yi was thrown onto the bed. He covered his buttocks and glared at Mississippi Lu angrily. He said he had a question for her. He was just curious why she closed the door. It turned out that she was going to beat him up. What a heartless fellow. To think that he was so kind and considerate of her. Li Yi looked at her warily and threatened. If you continue to act like this, I won't accompany you to the Wu kingdom. What did you say? Mississippi Lu was stunned. Her hand that was about to fall stopped in the air. She asked, what did you say just now? Say it again? I was thinking of accompanying you to the Wu kingdom after I'm done with my work. Now, I need to think about it. His original intention was not to go to the Wu kingdom. Counting the days, Lin Wanru should have reached the Qi kingdom by now. The business there was about to start. In this year, the situation in the fringe had also changed greatly. Every once in a while there would be news. He had to go and take a look. Since Mississippi Lu was so concerned about her precious disciple, he might have to make a trip to the Wu kingdom. Of course, before leaving the capital, he had to solve all the remaining problems. To the Wu kingdom? Mississippi Lu's beautiful eyes lit up. She asked, when? I was thinking of a month or 2. Li shook his head and said, but now, I'm not going. Mississippi Lu's face was filled with anger. The slender hand that was about to fall fiercely stopped in midair, fell again. But this time it was with a gentle force. A faint smile appeared on her face. She asked with concern, does it still hurt? Li did not have the chance to enjoy Mississippi Lu's gentle massage. He jumped up from the bed and ran out of the door at an unbelievable speed. As he ran out, he grabbed Xuanhuan's melon seeds. He ate them while thinking, so gentle, so gentle. Mississippi Lu is crazy. She's really crazy. Miss, when are we moving over? Miss, do you want me to help you pack? Miss, if we move over, what about Sister Ruoqing? Since elder Sister Ruoqing is going there, Xiaozhu will also go there, right? Zheng Zumo, who was embroidering a wedding dress, raised her head and glanced at Xiao Chui, who was carrying a small bag and wandering in front of her for almost an hour. Zheng Zumo lowered her head again and said, if you really can't wait, move over first. Anyway, there are other maids in the manor. Xiao Chui hurriedly put down the small bundle and came over with a smile. How could Xiao Chui understand Miss better than the other maids? Of course, I want to be with Miss. Goddess Luo Shui waved her hand and said, stay away from me, you're blocking the light. After chasing Xiao Chui away, he lowered his head and looked at a pattern on the wedding dress. He stared blankly for a long time before a vexed expression appeared on his face. Oh no, I forgot what kind of needle technique to use on this piece. She put the wedding dress and the needle and thread aside and walked towards Ruoqing's room. She remembered that when she was teaching her yesterday, she had demonstrated the steps on another brocade handkerchief. During the day there was usually no one in her room. Sometimes there were too many things to do and she might not come back at night. She pushed open the door and very quickly found the brocade handkerchief on the table. She picked it up and looked at it for a while. Not long after, she remembered the steps and put the brocade handkerchief back. Just as she was about to leave, her footsteps suddenly stopped. She turned around and looked at the bed. On the bed, under the pillow, the corner of a book was exposed. She was startled. This was the booklet that was pressed under the pillow by elder sister Ruoqing? For her to hide it like this, it must be something very important or private. Even if the two of them were very close, it would not be good to take it out and look at it when she was not around. She shook her head and walked in the direction of the door. When she walked to the door, her footsteps stopped again and she looked back at the bedside. How about just taking a look? She looked left and right, closed the door like a thief and returned to the bedside. She carefully took out the booklet under the pillow. There were no words on the cover. She carefully flipped to the next page. The first year of Jianghu, the first day of the 7th month. It was indeed elder sister Ruoqing's diary. She knew that Ruoqing had the habit of writing diaries since she was young. Although she did not write every day, she had accumulated a few thick books. At that time, she actually wanted to peek at elder sister Ruoqing's little secrets. However, Ruoqing hid it very well. After a few unsuccessful attempts, she gave up. At this moment, although she was a little frightened, she was actually a little excited that her wish had been fulfilled. Her gaze quickly moved up. The first year of Jianghu, the first day of the 7th month. What happened in that year's 7th month? That sour scholar wrote a love poem for her and was chased out of the jade courtyard by her mother. This matter was actually written in by her. The matter of him secretly eating osmanthus cake. So it was at that time that she was discovered. Poem from beyond the heavens. What nameless scholar? It was clearly that annoying fellow. Mid-Autumn Festival, the matter on the night of the Mid-Autumn Festival, that fellow. She slowly flipped through the pages, and a smile appeared on her pretty face. These were all things that they had experienced together in the past. Now that she recalled it, those memories and feelings from that time would surge out from her mind. She murmured a few words. That annoying fellow, why is he everywhere, even elder sister Ruoqing's diary? She lowered her head and continued to flip through the pages. As the pages turned, the smile on her face gradually froze and dissipated. Then it became a little pale, and a deep sense of loss and confusion began to appear in her eyes. Ruoqing walked into the courtyard and saw Xiao Chui sitting alone in the courtyard. She looked around and asked, Xiao Chui, where is Xuanmo? Xiao Chui was holding a triangular prism in her hand. After watching the sunlight pass through it, it became colorful. She was playing happily under the sun. Hearing Ruoqing's voice, she put down the thing in her hand and stood up. She said, Elder sister Ruoqing is back. Miss was here just now. She should have returned to her room now. She looked back and saw Zheng Xuanmo walking out of a room. She walked over and said, Miss, elder sister Ruoqing is back. Ruoqing walked over and said with a smile, the fish he sent yesterday is said to be a tribute from the palace. It's a river fish without many bones. He was worried that they wouldn't know how to cook it, so he told me how to cook it. It's been hot these days. Although it's frozen, it's better to eat it as soon as possible. Lee is so good to Mississippi. He sends fish every few days. The tribute from the palace is really much more delicious than the ones in the market. Xiao Chui said with a smile. Seeing Xiao Zhu holding her treasure and looking it up and down, she immediately trotted over and said anxiously, This is a gift from Lee. Xiao Zhu curled her lips and walked around the stone table with her. So what if he gave it to you? Can I play with it? Xiao Chui said with dissatisfaction. Lee gave it to me first. I haven't let you play with it yet. You are robbing me. Xiao Zhu stopped and looked at her. Are we still good sisters? Just let me play with it. Xiao Chui also stopped and hesitated. After a moment she said, Okay, but after you play with it you have to give it back to me. Ruoqing looked at the door of her room and then at her. She asked in confusion, Why did you come out of my room? Zheng Xuanmo smiled and said, I'm stupid. I forgot the needle technique you taught me yesterday, so I went in and looked at it again. It's okay. If you forget, I will teach you again. A woman only gets married once in her life. The wedding dress must be embroidered well. You can't be careless. She smiled and said, Wait a moment. I will go to the room to get the needle and thread. Zheng Xuanmo nodded and walked to the stone table in a daze. Beside her, Xiao Chui looked at Xiao Zhu who was playing with the prism under the sun. She couldn't help but laugh. Stupid. You don't even know how to do such a simple thing. I will teach you. She looked at the two girls who were laughing and scolding each other, then looked at Ruoqing who walked into the room. She felt that the wedding dress in her hand was a bit dazzling. Chapter 908. Sister Ruoqing's fish is so delicious. Xiao Chui put a mouthful of fish into her mouth and couldn't help but exclaim. Unlike her mistress, she didn't really like eating fish, but she always made an exception with Sister Ruoqing. If there was someone in this world who could cook as good as Li, it would definitely be Sister Ruoqing. Xiao Zhu pinched her face and said, "You're the one who can eat the most. You can have the leftovers later." Looking at the two girls playing, Wan Ruoqing smiled and turned to look at Zheng Zumo, who was holding a pair of chopsticks in her hand and stupidly putting the fish into her mouth but not chewing. She asked in confusion, "Zumo, what's wrong? Is today's food not to your taste?" Zheng Zumo came back to her senses and shook her head. "No, I just don't feel well." Wan Ruoqing put down her chopsticks and touched her forehead. She looked at her and shook her head. "It's not hot, but you don't look well. I'll go find a doctor." "No need, I'm just a bit tired. I'll be fine after eating and resting." Zheng Zumo shook her head again and said, "Sister Ruoqing, I'm moving over soon. You should come with us." Wan Ruoqing shook her head and smiled. "I won't be going. Xiao Zhu and I will move back to Willow Lane. We've lived there for a long time and are used to it." Zheng Zumo lowered her head and was silent for a while. She suddenly asked, "If I take away something you like very much, what will Sister Ruoqing do?" Wan Ruoqing was surprised. "What thing?" She looked into Wan Ruoqing's eyes and said in a low voice, "There's something that Sister Ruoqing likes very much. Something that is very important to you. We both like it very much, but you liked it first." Wan Ruoqing smiled and put a piece of fish in her bowl. "Take it if you like it. I don't have anything that I like very much or that's very important to me. What if it's that piece of paper with Immortal Magpie Bridge on it?" Wan Ruoqing paused in the middle of taking back her chopsticks. Soon she smiled and nodded. "Sure, but I left it in the brothel. I'll bring it to you when I come back tonight." Under the dim candlelight, Wan Ruoqing spread out the yellowed paper. Some parts of the paper had already become tattered. She gently stroked the words on the paper with a faint smile on her face. She didn't know how much time had passed until the oil lamp lit up. She folded it again and walked out the door. She lowered her head and looked at the thing in her hand with some reluctance. Then she knocked on the door next door. The door opened very quickly and Goddess Luo Shui walked out with sleepy eyes. She muttered, "Sister Ruoqing, it's already so late. Why aren't you sleeping?" Wan Ruoqing handed over the things in her hands. "This is for you." She rubbed her eyes, took it with both hands and asked doubtfully, "What is it?" "The things you talked about during the day." She reached out to tidy up her messy hair and said, "It's late. Go back to sleep." Zheng Zumo pulled her arm. "I want you to talk to me." Before Wan Ruoqing could nod, she was dragged in and sat on the edge of the bed. Zheng Zumo hugged her arm and rested her head on her shoulder. She murmured, "I don't want to leave you. You're about to get married, but you're still so childish. Sister Ruoqing, I'm sorry." She suddenly raised her head and looked into Wan Ruoqing's eyes. "I stole your favorite thing." Wan Ruoqing shook her head and said, "It should have been yours in the first place. What's mine is yours. What's mine is yours." After a moment of silence, Zheng Zumo suddenly smiled. She hugged her waist and said, "Hee, what I said today was all a lie. How could I steal something that my beloved Sister Ruoqing likes? Don't you like my poetry book very much? I'll give it to you, huh?" Seeing her sudden change, Wan Ruoqing was dazed and looked at her with a confused expression. "What are you talking about?" She hugged Wan Ruoqing and the two of them fell down together. "Sleep." Wan Ruoqing struggled to get up. "I'm going back to my room." She flipped over like a spoiled child and pressed Wan Ruoqing under her body. "No, I want to sleep with you in my arms tonight and in the future. You're about to get married. How can you?" "I don't care. I want in the future. I want forever." All right. If you say forever, then forever," Wan Ruoqing said helplessly. Then her body stiffened. She blushed and whispered, "Sleep, sleep. Don't touch." Goddess Luo Shui grabbed her hand and put it on a soft spot on her body. She murmured, "Now we're even." Li looked at Mississippi Lu, who was behind him, helplessly and said, "Don't follow me. I've said it 10 times. When things in the capital are settled, I'll go with you." "Why are you in such a hurry?" Mississippi Lu asked lightly. "What else do you have to deal with?" "The Chui family. If the Chui family doesn't fall, how can we leave in peace? It's not like you don't know what happened a while ago. This kind of person is insane and has no bottom line. He can do anything. You don't want the people and things related to us in the capital to be targeted by the Chui family after we leave, right?" Mississippi Lu didn't ask him again this time. She turned around and walked outside. Li Yi was stunned for a moment and asked, "Where are you going?" Mississippi Lu replied lightly, "I'll help you." Li Yi grabbed Mississippi Lu's arm and pulled her back. He regretted telling her about it earlier. Fang stood not far away and watched the joke. Compared to Li Yi, who was having a headache, he was obviously in a much better mood. Recently, Fang could be said to be riding on the crest of success. When he spoke, his back was much straighter. Mrs. Fang and her sworn sister, Miss Xiao, had just come back from shopping. Fang was carrying a lot of bags of various sizes in his hands, but his face was full of bright smiles. Mississippi Lu stopped and asked, "Do you feel that Uncle Fang is different from before?" Li Yi was surprised and asked, "What's the difference?" Mississippi Lu thought for a moment and said, "In the past, when he was with Mrs. Fang, he always looked sad. Recently, he has been smiling more and more." Li Yi sighed and said, "People are in high spirits when they encounter happy events. Let him be happy." "I just learned 2 words yesterday and they seem to say that you can't be too happy." Mississippi Lu looked at him and said, "When things reach an extreme, they will go in the opposite direction. Extreme joy begets." "What is it again?" "Extreme joy begets sorrow." Mississippi Lu glanced at him and said, "You don't need to remind me. I can also think of it." A strong man came from the front and greeted the two of them. "Young master," second Mississippi. Li Yi nodded and asked, "It's old Su. Didn't you go to Qing and Mansion to pick up mother-in-law?" "Where is mother-in-law?" Old Su sighed and said, "As soon as I came to the capital, I was dragged to the streets by my mother-in-law. I didn't bring any money with me, so I came back to get some." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Go quickly. Remember to bring more." The strong man laughed and greeted the two people who were walking toward him. "Hello, sister-in-law, hello, Miss Hong." After saying that, he realized that something was not quite right. His eyes stared straight at the young girl beside Mrs. Fang. Mrs. Fang looked at him and asked with a puzzled expression, "Do you know my sister?" "I don't know her." "Sister-in-law, you go ahead. I have something to do, so I'll go back first." Old Su shook his head with a firm expression and strode forward. Mrs. Fang turned around, looked at him and shouted, "Stop right there." Crash. The strong man stopped in his tracks. Fang's face turned pale, and the big and small bags in his hands fell to the ground. "What's wrong with him?" Mississippi Lu looked at Li Yi and asked in confusion. Li Yi pressed one hand on his forehead and sighed. He said, "He's too happy. Extreme joy begets sorrow." Chapter 909. "Tell me, do you know the younger sister of the Xiao family?" Mrs. Fang looked at Old Su and asked with an aggressive gaze. Old Su secretly glanced at Fang. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He trembled and said, I. Mrs. Fang put her hands on her hips and said angrily, "You what? Tell me." Fang sighed. As soon as he took a step forward, he heard a sigh. The woman next to Mrs. Fang sighed and said, "Cousin, don't worry. I won't cause any trouble for your family. I'll go back in a few days." As soon as he finished speaking, everyone present was dumbfounded. Old Fang pursed his lips in confusion, while Old Su stood rooted to the ground in a daze. Mrs. Fang was the first to react. She pointed at Old Su and asked the woman, "Sister, is he the distant cousin you mentioned?" The woman nodded and said, "If it weren't for the disaster in my hometown, Mrs. Fang was already furious. She pointed at Old Su and scolded, "You heartless man. You forgot your poor relatives when you got rich. Sister, you'll stay with us from now on. We won't trouble this heartless guy." No matter how stupid Old Su was, he still reacted at this moment. He smiled apologetically and said, "Sister-in-law, what are you talking about? Didn't I go to Qing and Prefecture recently? I just missed Little Hong. Since I'm back, I naturally can't trouble you any more." Mrs. Fang ignored her. She took her arm and said, "Let's go, sister." "Ignore them. Let's go back and try on the new clothes." After saying that, she glanced at Fang and stopped in her tracks. She asked, "Why are you sweating so much?" Fang wiped the sweat off his forehead and looked up. He sighed and said, "The sun is so hot today. My eyes are sweating." Mississippi Lu looked away and said in surprise, "I've been in the village for so many years. Why haven't I heard that Old Su has any distant cousins?" Li glanced at her and said, "If he says he does, then he does. Why are you worrying about him?" Mississippi Lu turned to look at him. Her expression did not change, but her grip on her sword tightened. Li touched his forehead. I have to think carefully. When are we going to the Wu Kingdom to visit my martial nephew?" Her chest heaved a few times and a moment later, a forced smile appeared on her face. I'm going to the league to train the newbies. I'll be back later. The reason why the martial arts practitioners who joined the Lu League improved so quickly was that there were many masters in the league. After accumulating enough points, they could exchange for pointers from these masters. Of course, if these masters were in a good mood, they would also train the newcomers for free. Mississippi Lu was obviously in a bad mood. Although she did not know the reason, the newcomers in the league must be careful. When he was about to go out, a servant of the Li family came to report that Lord Lu of the Ministry of Justice had come to visit. Lu Yi had been investigating an important case recently, and he must have made some progress. He gave up the idea of going out, poured 2 cups of tea and sat down in the hall. Lord Li, after Lu Yi came in, he first cupped his hands and bowed to him. At Li Yi's signal, he sat across from him. Li Yi raised his teacup and asked, "Has there been progress on that case?" Lu Yi nodded. "I've had people follow Xianxia for the past few days." Lord Li's guess is correct. There is indeed something wrong with the Qin family. What did you find out? Outside the capital, a manor owned by the Qin family under Qin Yan's name. There are some problems. Lu Yi's eyes were sharp. The manor is heavily guarded. Even the masters of the Secret Service can't sneak in. It doesn't look like a private garden for recreation at all. Usually, the people who enter and leave the manor are the nobles of the capital. The more it is so, the more suspicious it is. Li Yi was surprised. Even the masters of the Secret Service can't sneak in? Although there were no masters of the Grandmaster level in the Secret Service, there were many guests who were only a step away from the Grandmaster level. If even the masters of the Secret Service couldn't sneak in, it could be seen how heavily guarded the manor was. In the entire capital, perhaps only the Imperial Palace and the Department of Heavenly Punishment could compare. Lu Yi shook his head. He thought of something and said, "In the process of investigating Xianxia, I discovered some suspicious points." What suspicious points? Lu Yi thought for a moment. "Lord Li, do you know that a few years ago Xianxia raped his own aunt and committed the crime of incest, causing the capital to denounce him?" Li Yi nodded. "I heard that the woman he raped couldn't bear the humiliation and committed suicide. Later on, the Qin family suppressed the matter. Even though Prime Minister Qin is the current Minister of the Right, he has no way of influencing the people. How could the Qin family suppress the matter?" Lu Yi shook his head and said, "In this matter, the Cui family used the power of the King of Shu and countless dignitaries in the capital to suppress this rebellious matter. Even the Empress in the palace contributed a lot." Li Yi knew that Lu Yi would not bring up this matter for no reason, so he waited for him to continue. "The woman he raped was named Lin Lian. Before entering the Qin family, she was a slightly famous actress in the capital. Later on, she caught the eye of Prime Minister Qin's 5th son, Qin He. Not long after he took her in as a concubine, that incident happened. Lin Lian is actually not the girl's real name. She was just a disciple of a performer with the surname Lin in the capital. She changed her surname after she became her master. That Lin Lian passed away a long time ago, and the disciples she took in her lifetime all had different experiences. That Miss Lin Lian is the oldest of her disciples and has inherited her acting skills. Her youngest disciple has completely inherited her skills in the art of the zither and has even surpassed her. She is extremely famous in the capital." Li Yi sighed and said, "Her youngest disciple, the girl with outstanding skills on the guqin, her stage name is Lin Xuanhuan, right?" Lu Yi nodded and said, "Yes, it is the deceased Lin Xuanhuan. Lin Qin, who reported to the Ministry of Justice, is also their sister." The common people only know that Chu Ping killed Lin Xuanhuan, but they have overlooked one thing. Lin Xuanhuan was already seriously ill. Even without that incident, she only had a few months to live. Lu Yi shook his head and said, "This is not all suspicious. Official Zheng said that there was no such thing as a criminal. This matter was originally a trap set up by the Cui family for the Chu family. The Cui family bribed Lin Xuanhuan in advance, but their original intention was not to use Lin Xuanhuan's death to threaten the Chu family. That night, someone saw the 5th master of the Qin family, Qin He, in a restaurant across from the Fine Sound Pavilion drunk. Official Zheng once said that when there are too many coincidences, it is no longer a coincidence." Li Yi shook his head and said, "So this was not a trap set up by the Cui family for the Chu family?" Lu Yi looked at him and nodded. "This was a trap set up by someone for the Cui family and the Chu family. If the Chu family is crippled, the Cui family will lose an arm." Lu Yi put down his teacup and said, "Although Prime Minister Qin has not had much contact with the Cui family in this past year, the relationship between the two families cannot be severed. If something happens to the Qin family, the Chui family will really lose an arm? He raised his head and muttered, "This fifth Master Qin, what does he want to do?" The Fang family. The wife of the Fang family and the girl walked into the house arm in arm. Fang came in carrying bags of various sizes. "Close the door," the wife of the Fang family suddenly said. "It's broad daylight, why close the door?" Fang muttered. He put down the things in his hands and closed the door. The wife of the Fang family let go of the girl's hand and looked at the two of them. With a cold expression she asked, "When did you start?" Chapter 9-10. Fang's face changed. He raised his head and opened his mouth, but he didn't say anything. When the woman heard this, her body trembled and her face turned pale in an instant. She looked at Fang Lucier and said in panic, "Sister, don't." Fang Lucier waved her hand and said, "Don't call me that. I don't have a sister like you." Little Red's lips moved, but before she could say the next word, a mountain-like figure had already stood in front of her. Fang looked up at his wife and said in a low voice, "It's all my idea. Blame me." Fang Lucier pointed her finger at him and said in a trembling voice, You really have an affair." Fang Lucier was stunned and looked at her in disbelief. "You just tricked me." "Well, you're really capable." Fang Lucier picked up the broom on the side and fiercely whipped him. "You brought a fox spirit to our house, but you're still in the right, aren't you?" Little Red's eyes were full of tears. She desperately stood in front of Fang and cried, "Sister, don't hit Fang Lucier. If you want to hit him, hit me. It's all my fault. I seduced him." Fang Lucier's broom didn't fall. She collapsed on the ground and cried, "Why is my life so bitter? I can't live like this anymore." Fang Lucier's face showed a painful expression. He scratched his hair hard and then loosened it powerlessly. Li Yi and Lu Yi walked out of the mansion. Lu Yi thought for a moment and said, "After all, it's a serious matter. If we don't have enough evidence, we can't do anything. I'll ask them to keep an eye on it and try to get some useful clues." "Don't bother." Li Yi waved to the sloppy old man not far away and said, "Su, I need your help with something." 10 drumsticks. The sloppy old man had recently understood that White Rabbit creamy candies was not a long-term solution. Under the influence of his second granduncle, he had a special liking for drumsticks. This was not the only thing he had learned from his second granduncle. Yesterday he had even asked Li Yi to make him a rocking chair that was exactly the same as his second granduncle's. Li Yi nodded. "Deal. It was just cooking once." Xuanhuan's body was still growing during this period of time. She should eat more good food to nourish herself. After 2 years, it would be difficult to nourish herself again. The sloppy old man glanced at Louis Chang. "What are you waiting for? Let's go." Louis looked at him. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "If there's anything, tell Su. You guys just have to wait for the news." Grandmasters could be said to be the pinnacle of martial artists. Ordinary martial artists could only be found but not sought after. Using them to gather information was definitely a waste of their talents. After sending them off, when he was about to walk back, he saw a figure squatting in the corner with his head buried between his knees. There was no sound at all. Li looked around, walked over, and asked in confusion, "What's wrong now? Didn't you make it clear just now?" Fang raised his head and said in a hoarse voice, "Xiaohong is gone." Li was stunned. He looked at him and asked tentatively, "Your wife knows?" Fang nodded. Li squatted down beside him and wanted to say some comforting words. When the words were about to come out, they only turned into a sigh. "Don't be anxious about this kind of thing. Let's take it slow." Fang raised his head and looked at him with burning eyes. He asked, "Young master, am I too much of a jerk?" After that, he lowered his head and shook his head. "No, I shouldn't ask you this question." The problem that Fang encountered could only be solved by himself. No one else could help or intervene. Li Yi's own affairs were even more complicated. They needed to be done step by step and could not be rushed. Beast, he's a beast. The sloppy old man came in from outside angrily. Li Yi was worried that he would get angry and tear down the house. He hurriedly stood up and asked, "What happened?" The sloppy old man was still angry. "That place is a devil's den. I've lived for a long time, but I've never seen such a crazy person. The owner of that place should be killed by 1,000 cuts. If it weren't for Lu's repeated orders yesterday, I would have massacred that devil's den." Lu Yi followed behind and said in a low voice, "Your Excellency, it's almost certain that those missing women are related to the Qin family. The previous Peng family should have set up a trap for Chu Ping. That place is the root of evil." Li looked at him. "That place and the Peng family, Louis gritted his teeth. It's the same place. I've already sent people to the secret intelligence office to send more people. There's no time to lose. We need to act immediately. Louis said a few words in a hurry. Someone from the secret intelligence office came to report and left in a hurry. After the sloppy old man sat down, he gulped down a few mouthfuls of tea and recounted everything he had seen last night. The women tied up in the room were obviously different from the prostitutes outside. They no longer knew how to resist. Their eyes were empty and vacant, and they could only be manipulated. When the sloppy old man said this, he crushed 3 cups and smashed a wooden table. Li Yi had taken away the precious purple clay teapot in time to avoid this disaster. He shook his head and said, "The secret intelligence office has already mobilized all their forces. Calm down and wait for the news." As soon as he finished speaking, Fang walked in from outside in a daze. He looked at Li Yi and said in a daze, "Young master, Little Red is missing," Li Yi said in surprise. "Missing? She didn't return to the Jade Courtyard?" Fang shook his head and said, "No, I asked the madam. She said that Little Red hasn't returned since she left last time." Li Yi thought for a moment and asked again, "What about Drunken Ink?" Fang looked anxious. "I went there too. Little Chui said she didn't go there either. She didn't go back last night. She didn't bring any money with her. She doesn't know anyone in the capital. Where could she go? Don't worry," Li Yi said as he walked out of the door. "Think about it first. Where else could she have gone? I'll ask the brothel and the government to inquire about the news." Outside the door, Fang Liusher's face was pale and her expression was extremely remorseful. Seeing Fang come out, she went to greet him and wanted to say something. But Fang just glanced at her and left in a hurry. In the Qin family, Qin Yan looked at his son who walked in from outside and asked with a sullen face, "You didn't return last night. What did you do?" "I went to find a friend to drink." Qin Yu looked drunk. He shook his head and said, "If there's nothing else, I'll go back to my room first. I'm sleepy, this bastard." Qin Yan looked at his swaying back and forth as he left. He waved his hand and shook his head helplessly. Has everything been taken care of? Passing through a moon door, Qin Yu's drunkenness disappeared and he asked in a low voice. The person beside him immediately said, "Little Duke, don't worry. The person has been moved. This time they'll definitely come empty-handed." A bunch of idiots. Qin Yu twitched the corner of his mouth and then a trace of coldness appeared on his face. He murmured, "Li Yi County Marquis Li Dr. Li. I'll see how long you can be proud for." The coldness flashed across his face and he asked again, "That woman last night?" The person nodded repeatedly. "She's been sent to your room." Qin Yu didn't speak again. He walked to the door and pushed it open. Seeing the empty room, his face instantly darkened. Where is she? Chapter 9-11. Little Red had disappeared. Not only had Li Yi made arrangements for the brothel, but he had also informed the county government and even the secret intelligence office. They had already acted quickly. All they could do now was wait. There was no news, but Louis soon came. "There's a traitor in the secret intelligence office." Louis's face was as calm as still water. He said slowly, "When we brought people there, there were no traces left. There were only a few servants of the Qin family, but they had something on them. After all, that was the house of an important official in the court. It's a bit troublesome." Li looked at him and asked, "You didn't find any clues at all?" Louis shook his head. "One night is enough for them to move the people away. Other clues are not enough to be used as evidence. There are people watching the surroundings and there are no suspicious people coming in or out. There should be a secret passage inside, but we have no reason to search it now." "What about the traitor?" Li asked. "He committed suicide." Louis shook his head and said, "That person has been in the secret intelligence office for nearly 20 years. When we found him, he bit the poison sac and didn't say a word." "I see." Li nodded and asked again, "Do you know which family the carriages that go in and out usually belong to?" "There are records of them." Louis replied, then raised his head and said, "But sir, with just these, I'm afraid it's difficult to form evidence. Moreover, those people are all nobles in the capital, and their status is extraordinary." Li waved his hand. "These are enough." The secret intelligence office had a special status in the court, but it was still troublesome to encounter such things. Louis would have a headache later. Breaking into a private house was not a big deal in other places, but this was the capital and everything had to be done according to the law. Moreover, the court had changed the law not long ago against the opposition of countless nobles. If the court protected the secret intelligence office breaking into an official's house, it would undoubtedly be contradictory. It would give those people a reason and maybe something more serious would happen. To be honest, even Li Yi himself didn't expect that they could plant people in the secret intelligence office. He had to admit that he had underestimated the Cui family. This time, Lu Yi had returned without any results. They would definitely be more careful and even stop all actions. If they wanted to collect evidence through normal channels, it would be very difficult. Crack. In the end, Li Yi did not manage to keep the teapot. You didn't find him? The sloppy old man slammed his palm on the new table, causing it to shatter. The teapot on top of it also fell to the ground and broke into several pieces. Are they messing with me? The anger on the sloppy old man's face didn't last long. He quickly revealed a smile, stroked his beard and muttered, "Interesting, interesting. How many years has it been since I've encountered something so interesting?" The smile on his face was like that of a benevolent elder, but the servant girl who came in to clean up the mess couldn't help but shiver. She felt her body was a little cold and her hands moved a little faster. Cui family. Cui Qingming sighed and said, "What a pity. In the past 20 years, there was only one spy left in the secret intelligence office. Now there's no one left," someone beside him comforted. "Second brother, there's no need to sigh. As the saying goes, there's no gain without loss. Although we've lost that spy, the secret intelligence office recklessly intruded into an official's residence. This is not a small crime. The imperial court has reformed the law and it can't be overturned. With Lu Yi around, the Ministry of Justice is almost unable to interfere. If we get rid of him, it will be much more convenient to do things in the future." Cui Qingming nodded and said, "Let them be prepared. This time if we don't pull Lu Yi down completely we won't rest." The Cui clan hated Lu Yi to the bone. At that time, it was precisely because of Lu Yi's meddling that caused all their arrangements and deployments towards the Chu clan to turn into ash. The Chu clan had fallen, and the Cui clan had lost an arm. If this matter were to implicate the Qin clan and those people, then they would really arrive at the end of their rope. At this point, they almost understood that it was unlikely for His Majesty to summon the King of Shu back. But if the status quo was maintained, it might not be a bad thing for them. Once His Majesty passed away, who was more suitable than the King of Shu in terms of identity and status when the position of the Eastern Palace was vacant? If it really came to that, it would be much easier for them to do things. Cui Qingming showed a sarcastic smile and said, "I really want to see with my own eyes what expression County Marquis Li has now." Li Yi was naturally anxious, but it was not because of the secret intelligence office. As long as he knew the facts, the evidence was not important. What he was worried about was that if something really happened to Little Red, Old Fang's family would be ruined. However, the brothel and the government were not omnipotent. Even if they were to find clues, it would take time. Instead of searching around like a headless fly, it was better to wait here. Some people of the Cui family were also anxious. "Little Duke, I've asked the front and back doors and no strange woman came in or out. That woman must be hiding somewhere in the mansion. If you look hard you can definitely find her." Qin Yu glanced at him coldly and said, "Go and look for her. Go and look for her in every room in the mansion." The servant was stunned and asked again, "Go and look for her in every room." "Prime Minister and the Masters." Qin Yu kicked him and said, "Except for those few, don't let anyone go." In a remote and messy woodshed in Qin's mansion, a woman looked at the figure covered in a black cloak and said gratefully, "Thank you for saving me, my benefactor." "Little Red, why are you here?" A hoarse voice came from the black cloak, and it was not difficult to tell that it was a woman's voice. "I was caught by them," the woman replied. Then she realized something and asked in shock, How do you know my name is Little Red?" The person in the black cloak put down the hood of her cloak. It was an ordinary-looking woman, but there was a long scar on her face, which looked a little scary. The woman looked at her and said, "I went down the mountain with Uncle Fang and saw you on the road." Little Red's expression was a little excited. She grabbed her sleeve and asked, You know Big Brother Fang?" The woman with the long scar on her face did not answer this question. Instead, she looked at her and said, "This place is very remote. They can't find this place. You hide here first. I'll think of a way to spread the news." As soon as she finished speaking, there was a sudden urgent knock on the door. The woman's expression changed. She hurriedly let Little Red hide in a large vat and threw her black cloak inside. She carried a bundle of firewood and walked to the door. She asked, "Who is it?" "The firewood is not ready yet." "Wait a moment." A rough voice came from outside the door. "Open the door. The community sends warmth." You're tuning in to the Sword Dance in the Vast Sky YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.